Welcome to the November edition of the Cinetopia radio show and podcast. I'm Amanda, your host, and on this show, I'm joined with show regulars Gary Arnott and Amaya Benuelos-Marco as we review the Palme d'Or winning film Anatomy of a Fall, plus new release films including the Scottish documentary Loch Ness That Created a Monster and the British film Femme, which was featured at the Edinburgh International Film Festival earlier this year, but out in cinemas on the 1st of December. Amaya and I also talk all things documentary, covering IDFA, the International Documentary Festival Amsterdam, which happened in this November, reviewing 3 films together, El Echo, Already Made, and Cemeteries of Cinema. Maya also chatted with director Juan Palacios, who directed the film As the Tide Comes In, which was part of the festival's international competition. I also sat down with Yi Wang, director of Weir East Film Festival, which is coming to Edinburgh starting the 28th of November with a free event in City Chambers, which I'll be part of myself, as well as a series of films playing at Summerhall from the 29th to the 1st of December. So we sit down and talk about that film festival as well. All of this on this show, so stay tuned. Welcome to November edition. I'm here with 2 regulars, but I don't think we've been recording for a while. Gary, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me back. It's been a few months. I think it was the Edinburgh Film Festival was the last episode I've done. So, but yeah, I'm good. Glad to be back.
Yeah, and you took a trip to the US for a bit, right? And did you see any famous film places or go to any good cinemas?
We did. So yeah, I was away for a couple of weeks. I went to Colorado Springs, and at Denver, New York as well. And obviously, when you're walking around in New York, there's just sights from all your favorite films. We went to Cat's Deli, and we went to the carousel that's featured in the poster of Past Lives. That was like our little
nice,
film,
yeah,
like the little film tourism part of it. But it was a really good trip. But it has kind of kept me away from writing, so I've not reviewed anything since September. So back at it now. Obviously, we're coming into award season, so there's lots of films coming out in the next few weeks. Yeah, I'll be writing and podcasting a lot more soon.
Tons of films coming out. I mean, feel like this weekend is full of films I have yet to see, and just exciting for the next couple months, which for film reviewers and film critics. We're also here with Amaya. Amaya and I just came back from Amsterdam for covering the International Documentary Festival Amsterdam. Amaya, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We'll be covering that later on in the show. More films and including an interview with one of the directors. But first up, we're going to do a film review of the film that won the Palme d'Or this year, Anatomy of a Fall. And Gary, do you want to tell us about a little bit of an overview or summary of this film?
Yes. So Anatomy of a Fall. It's the latest film by the director Justine Triet. She's a French filmmaker, and this film is set in France, and it's kind of like a mysterious death drama that turns into a courtroom thriller. So the premise is basically there's a marriage between a German woman and a French man, and they've got a young son who's visually impaired, and he's out walking his dog one day. It comes back to their home and finds his dad lying dead and just outside the house. And so the film starts with that shocking moment, and then kind of unpacks it over 2.5 hours and gets into the nitty-gritty detail of what happened, and you get a feel for their backstories, and then it kind of around halfway through goes into like a courtroom drama setting. And I think it's a fantastic film. I think it's brilliantly acted, really well made, and it also flies by. I think the runtime, it's 2.5 hours, but doesn't feel like that at all. And I was really, really impressed by this film. Very accomplished. Interested to know what you both think of it.
Yes, I I totally agree with you. I am not, in general, that much attracted to films that are like, courtroom dramas. I find them a bit boring in general. But obviously, I was really interested in this one also because, it received the Palme d'Or. So that's, in a way, always recognition of quality. And also, I had seen the trailer and it looked like really interesting. So, as you said, it's super long, but it really is worth every minute of it. The tension, the playfulness between the characters is actually, there's a lot of humor in the film, which I didn't expect at all. And it's also a very interesting take on these gender dynamics as well, which, I'm always thinking about these things, but I really love the argument, and I don't want to say much about it because obviously it's a very important part of the film. So for those people that haven't watched the film yet, but I thought it was brilliant the way that dialogue unfolds and we see the gender the gender role dynamics there, and yeah, as you said, is really amazingly, the actors are all brilliant, all of them, and I haven't watched any other films by this director before, so I can't really say much about her work, and maybe you both know a bit more about her previous work, but I thought it was a really brilliant piece of film and super entertaining, and also food for thought in different ways, and also like the ending. Obviously we're not going to talk about the ending, but it's still kind of inconclusive in a way, and you never know. So I also like that about the film. Yeah. What did you think about it, Amanda?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I'm not a courtroom drama person either, and I don't think any of the posters or things got me really excited. It was probably the Palme d'Or that got me excited, and then it oftentimes takes me a while to get into a film, to be honest. And I'm really glad that I wasn't late for this film, because sometimes I accidentally come in a bit late or something like that. And this is like, everything happens obviously right at the beginning to set everything up. And then I was thinking, well, oh my gosh, what's going to go on for the next 2.5 hours? But I was captivated through the whole thing. I thought, and I think you were saying the inconclusiveness of that, I think, is what makes it interesting too. And I think it's about and the gender dynamics I really noted, but I think specifically in the courtroom and how people perceived the defendant, the wife, and also even I thought the son was a really interesting actor. I think did a really great job. It was really like sort of this idea of memory and what you remember and how things happen, and whether or not you can, whether you want to believe or you do believe, or and trust and whatnot. So I think the inconclusiveness of whether or not we know the truth of what happened or not is a really important part of the main structure of the film, to keep that open. And I think that was really one of the fascinating parts of it, because you never totally knew which way it was going to go. And I think that was what was interesting for me. Gary, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's quite rare in a film these days where you're watching a film and you genuinely don't know where it's going to go or what the outcome is going to be. And I think this one does that very well, and the dialogue is fantastic. And in that argument scene, like you say, Amaya, and then generally through the whole courtroom scenes as well. A film I would liken it to is Cinetopia, which we reviewed earlier in the year, which is a very detailed and intricate courtroom drama, and this one's got elements of that. And I was totally engrossed by it. I would mention the actor who plays the prosecution lawyer. I think is fantastic. I feel like he threatens to steal the film in some moments with his performance. His name's Antoine Reinhardt. So yeah, I thought he was fantastic. It was a little bit like you, Amanda, and I didn't really know what I was getting when I went into the film. I actually saw it. It was a surprise screening, so it had been heavily rumored that it was going to be Anatomy of a Fall. I think the the sort of the release dates kind of lined up for it. And I knew that it won the Palme d'Or. It also won the Palme Dog award. So there's a dog in this, the family dog. There's some fantastic acting from an animal. There's some kind of pivotal scenes with the dog as the film develops, and I think the dog's fantastic as well. I will just say, touching on what you'd said earlier, I haven't seen loads of Justine Trier's work, but I'd seen a film called Sybil, which she made a few years ago. It's kind of about the relationship between a therapist and her patient, and Sandra Hüller is in that, but in a very brief supporting role. She's fantastic in that, and I think she really, she's really great in this. And I know that there's kind of, I know around this time of year we always, like, whenever we're talking about films, there's always like that talk around like awards, and I think her name is getting thrown around. I wouldn't be surprised if she's nominated for that. She's also in Zone of Interest, the new Jonathan Glazer film, which I've not seen yet, but I heard she's fantastic in that as well. So
thank you for mentioning the dog as well, because I was in so much distress at some point. And the dog is fantastic, and I love that the credits, he's the first one to appear on the credits as well. I thought that was very cute of the filmmakers. But I just wanted to mention that the actor that you just mentioned that plays the prosecutor, he was also in 120 Beats Per Minute, which is this fantastic film by Yi Wang about the whole movement of ACT UP in Paris during the 80s, during the crisis of AIDS. And we were like, oh, this face sounds familiar. I went with a friend, and then we're like, oh yeah, he's in 120 Beats Per Minute as well. And he's just a fascinating character, and the way that he's like taking the books of Sandra, as a sort of example of that she's a murderer, and then he doesn't believe the child's version of the story because it's subjective. It's like your whole conception of subjectivity is really fascinating. And I was just going to mention as well that the only thing not that I didn't like, but I didn't believe, is the fact that the child is put through the whole court, the whole trial. I thought that was, I don't think that would happen in real life, that like a minor has to experience that whole thing when he's also obviously experiencing trauma still because his dad is dead. So, I just didn't believe that bit of the film. But apart from that, I thought it was well-rounded and really well made.
I agree with you on Gary. I thought a lot of Saint Omer as well by seeing this film, but I liked them both, but I liked this film a bit more. I think it was also because that one was like playing with style in a way that was slightly focused on the style of the film versus this one, which was, I think, very much focused on the emotion and the story, and was able to kind of go back and forth with flashbacks and things like that kept the story captivating and interesting for quite a long time. Well, that's Anatomy of a Fall. I think we all agree that film is great, and we highly recommend it. Go see it in the cinema, and it's worth your 2.5 hours. So that on to the next. So the next film we're going to review is Loch Ness, They Created a Monster, a documentary by John McClaverty, and it's a very archive-rich documentary focusing on the search for the Loch Ness Monster, and I think like kind of the frenzy around that in the 70s and 80s, which Honestly, I've always heard, I think we've always heard of the Loch Ness Monster, and especially some people who live in Scotland or from Scotland, it's quite a tourist attraction. But back then it was quite a hunt. And there was a lot of, so the film really focuses on the hunters, the people, trying to find, and the eccentricities of that story versus the actual Loch Ness Monster. And whether or not those were true, but I mean, they had some quite serious people who were talking about it very seriously. Like you had Leonard Nimoy do a stand-up, intro to a show. You had David Attenborough, like in this archive. So it brings a lot of so sort of like the whole craze of it and the history that I didn't know about. I actually never been to Loch Ness, but was fascinating. It's my kind of film in that way. I think I'll talk a little bit about maybe my reservations on the film. But overall, it was an enjoyable watch. Gary, what did you think?
I thought it was a lot of fun. And you'll know more about documentary filmmaking than me. I don't tend to watch that many documentaries. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And I think, like say, I'm Scottish, grown up in Scotland, so obviously very aware of the sort of tourist aspect around Nessie. But it was actually quite a surprise to me. I didn't realise that people were so seriously hunting back in the 60s and 70s. So I found it quite informative as well. It's quite interesting seeing these different efforts, like the London-based guy Frank Searle, who kind of lived on the shores of Loch Ness on the banks of Loch Ness for like 20 years, and he became kind of part of the tourist attraction itself, where people would go to see the loch, but also to see his caravan, and so that's like a really kind of creepy, but kind of like a fun, like amazing story within a story in this documentary. Quite liked how they kind of dropped in parts with him throughout it, but I thought it was well made, and I was surprised to see like you say, David Attenborough turn up, Michael Parkinson. There was like some recognizable faces talking about it, and I think it also does a good job of like looking at Loch Ness and the Loch Ness Monster from different angles. So you get the kind of the hunter aspect, which the film is kind of largely focused on, but then there's also some sections around like the tourism, like the bus tours, and then like the merchandise and this consumerism aspects around it. And I was amazed to read that it brings in, I think it was £50 million per year of tourism in and around the Loch Ness Monster. So I had fun with it. What were your reservations around it, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a huge fan of archive film, and I really got into the archive aspects of it. There were parts of this drone footage, and I think and the kind of bus, where the tourist bus and stuff like that, that really pulled me away from kind of maybe the now was pulling me away a little bit from the then, and in a way that I didn't think was necessary or as polished. And I think the story was quite lovely from the archive side, I guess, is was my thought. And I think there could have been a little bit less of that sort of typical drone shot that I would normally. I just sort of attune that to. I mean, honestly, I have a drone, and I love drone shots, but I think sometimes I see that and I think of a Netflix, like true crime film or something like that. So, and maybe the reenactment of the Frank character as well. But I did like, I made me think a lot about why people do these things. And I sort of thought, again, 70s and 80s is a little early for me, but in the 90s and with the Titanic and whatnot, I feel like there's kind of a similar sort of frenzy around that. And when we kind of people from all over the world, and I thought that was what was really interesting, is as someone who didn't grow up in Scotland but now lives in Scotland, knew of Loch Ness and in some aspects this romanticism of wanting to believe, and whether or not the people dedicating their lives to the banks of just to search for it is fascinating, and why people do that. I think in similar situation with Titanic, you look at, I love to give James Cameron a bad rap, but like he made a film because he was obsessed with it, like he wanted to go down there. But anyway, I think there's something really interesting about why people do these things. I don't think that the film is about believing or not. I think you have to be romantic, I suppose, to believe it, but it's more about the why people do what they do, and why people did this at this time, and why we get so excited around it, and why there still is this tourist fascination with it. So it made me appreciate it more. Maybe I will go to Loch Ness and look for it. I guess it was just that I didn't necessarily need to see all kind of that modern day stuff as much as I liked the archive based part of the story.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. I think it does kind of take you out the film a little bit, and I do think that the sort of 60s and 70s, 80s, these mostly men, there's a women in Belgium as well, who had a fascination with finding the monster or getting footage of the monster. But I do think that I mentioned them earlier, but to mention Frank Serral again, I feel like there could be a film solely about which would be interesting to see. But I think that people who are already interested in the Loch Ness monster will enjoy this film, and people who aren't might it won't harm the Loch Ness tourist industry with this film doing the rounds. So hope people go and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did play at the Inverness Film Festival. Just a shout out for the Inverness Film Festival, and I think it won the second audience award, first being Tish, which we just showed. As a shout out to Tish, because it's currently out in cinemas right now, around the photographer Tish Murtha. So check that out if you can. But it's doing well. Where Loch Ness, they created monsters, it's very popular with audiences. So I think it's a fun watch. It's not it's not a challenging watch. So if you wanna learn a little bit more about the Loch Ness frenzy, go watch it. So the next film we're going to review is Femme, which is out 1st of December. And Gary, you saw this film, I think, at Glasgow Film Festival, or you saw it previously, right? Or no?
Yeah, I saw it at Edinburgh Film Festival.
Oh, Edinburgh Film Festival. Okay, yeah.
So the film is directed by Sam H. Freeman and Ing Chun Peng. And they actually made a short film called Femme in 2021. So this is the feature adaptation of their own short film. And the story follows a man called Jules, who is he's a drag act performer, and he goes under the flamboyant alias of Aphrodite Banks. And you see a drag performance in the opening moments of the film. Then on his way home, he gets brutally attacked by a thug called Preston, who's like kind of egged on by his friends. So this horrible homophobic attack. Preston's played by George Mackay, and then like the film moves forward a few months, and the paths of the two men cross again, but in quite unexpected circumstances. And then the film kind of explores this growing and shifting and changing dynamic between the two men. What did you think of this, Amanda? You said it was quite terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, this film was probably one of the scarier films I've seen in a while. I was terrified for Jules, the main character, played by Nathan Stewart Jarrett, and I mean, George Mackay was such an evil like character at the very beginning, and I was sort of not aware, like I was not convinced why the main character Jules was going forward to continue to engage with the person who perpetrated such a horrible act on him. And I think that trauma, so I was curious, but I found myself like nervous, throughout pretty much most of the film, even up to the end, and not give anything completely away. I think it was a really interesting film because, and I think it is an important film, but yeah, I just sometimes my motivations on why you would re-engage in that trauma was hard for me. But it wasn't that I'm glad I got through the film for sure. How about you? What do you think of the film?
It was very intense, and yeah, I agree. You kind of question the motivations of Jules's character. Yeah, brilliantly played by Nathan Stewart Jarrett. And the film deals with like pretty heavy topics around toxic masculinity and revenge porn, and that idea of like how far you're going to go for revenge. Very much a film of like masks or like masquerading, and I think the film plays with that very well because the obvious mask really is that Jules lives his life kind of performing as this drag performer who seems pretty different to what he's like without all the clothing and the makeup on. But then, like as the film goes on, you realize that Preston's also wearing a mask of sorts, where he's kind of George Mackay's pretty unrecognizable from his roles that people might know him from, and things like Sunshine on Leith and Pride. Like he's got this 1917 where he's like kind of the hero type, but he has played villains before. He was really, really great playing Ned Kelly in True History. So we knew that he had that in his locker, but in this film he's got the tattoos and he's bulked up and he's pretty scary. So it's fun to see the casting, like how he kind of transforms into this villain. But it's a complex performance. And yeah, I was looking up. I'm quite interested in seeing the short film that it was based on. The casting is quite interesting. In the short film, the characters, Jules was played by Papa Esidu, and Preston was played by Harris Dickinson, another two great performers. So I thought it was quite interesting to know. And I think part of me was thinking like the writing of the characters in the beginning. I kind of thought like, is this character of Preston authentic in terms of like what a thuggish homophobic villain would be like in London, or is it like a bit of a caricature? And then the performances as the film goes on really elevates the script to, I think George Mackay is a great actor, and I think really the strength of the film is his performance, and also Nathan Stewart Jarrett, who's also I really like him, remembered him from his days in Misfits. He's really good. So yeah, I think it was an intense, important film, deals with heavy topics, but yeah, it's really elevated by those central performances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really good point you made about masks, and I think one of the things that the main character Jules says is, as one client says, she, like when you're talking about the performing as that she was the real me versus and me as the performer inside, and sort of the way that one has to deal with the masks that you wear in life. And I think you said the performances is what drove this film and what kept me interested. I really think that more than I would say the writing or, like I said, the motivations, I think it was hard for me at the very beginning to with the story to believe that someone would re-engage with that. But again, maybe that's just my own personal predilection and and how frightening I felt. But I felt the way the film with from the music to the way that it was shot and everything like that, was very scary, and it was I think that's what his intention was to be, and I think very thought provoking as well. So worth watching. A lot more intense than our previous film we talked about, Loch Ness. So a little bit darker of a film experience, but worth it all the same.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd recommend seeing the film. As Signature Entertainment are releasing it in cinemas, and then it'll be on demand, I think. But in cinemas, probably for a short run from the 1st of December. And yeah, like you say, the film also looks really good. It kind of takes place in this kind of dark underbelly of London, where it's all neon lights and dark. You don't know quite what's going to be lurking in the shadows behind each corner. And yeah, it really creates this intensity that as Jules kind of wrestles with the trauma of the attack and kind of his motivations around getting past that and finding closure, and what that means for Preston once they cross paths again. So yeah, it's very good.
Great. So check out Femme in its 1st of December, correct? Yeah. So check it out in cinemas then, and when we come back, we'll be talking about IDFA at the Documentary Festival in Amsterdam. Right, and so today I'm here with Amaya Banuelos-Marco, and we're talking about IDFA 2023, the biggest documentary festival, I believe, in the world. Maya and I both went for the first part of this year's festival. Maya, you've been to IDFA many times before, correct?
Well, I didn't say many times, just a couple of times before. Yeah, I went in 2018 and 2019, so just before the pandemic. And so I was really excited to come back to the festival because, as you said, it's the largest documentary film festival in the world. Well, I mean, when they say that, you don't know if they refer to Europe, to the entire world, but yeah, it's kind of a very well-renowned festival for documentary film. So it was exciting to be back, and to be back with you as well, because it's always nice to sort of share screenings and thoughts about the films with someone else. So yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did that a few years back, 2 years back, and with Berlinale. But I always admired IDFA from afar as a documentary filmmaker and documentary lover. Went, I think in 2017, wrote a paper about Q&As and went to tons of Q&As for my master's, and then went back in 2018 with a focus on the industry program. This year, I think we were mostly thinking about this radio show and podcast, as well as programming for the doc program. And so much more around watching the films, but also really appreciated the Q&As. And I think we'll be talking about a few films that we experienced, some filmmaker Q&As that were really quite wonderful, and glad that we encountered those. First film we're going to review on this IDFA edition is El Echo. And Amaya, do you want to sort of give us an intro to that film and what we saw?
Yes, of course. So El Echo, or The Echo in its English title, is the latest film by Tatiana Hueso, who's a Mexican Salvadorian filmmaker. And this film was part of the Science Strand, which is not a competitive strand at the IDFA festival. And this film, it already had caught our eyes because we knew that it had won 2 very important awards at the Berlinale this year. So it received the Encounters Award for Best Director and also the Berlinale Documentary Award at this year's Berlin International Film Festival. The film has also received other awards at Morelia Film Festival, which is a very important film festival in Mexico. And so, yeah, we were just very excited to see this film at IDFA. And as you said, it was really great as well that it had a talk with the filmmaker afterwards, which it's a bit of a different format to the Q&A because it's kind of an extended talk in a way. So it really gave us an opportunity to really hear from the filmmaker and go in depth about the film. So the film takes us to this remote Mexican village called El Eco. This is a remote village in northern Mexico, where life consists of the most elementary things. And what's really beautiful about this film is that it focuses on the experiences of 3 young girls of different ages. So these are Montse, Luzma, and Sarai. And we see how they care for the animals, they care for the land, they care for each other, and they also care for their grandmother. So, yeah, I thought it was like from the opening scene, you knew that you were there for an immersive and an absolutely stunning cinematographic experience. Not just the aesthetics of the film. I think this is something you and I discuss a lot, that sometimes films can be very heavy on the aesthetic side, but not so much on the content. And then, they are very beautiful to see, but are they actually good films? Whereas this film really balanced really well the sort of cinematographic aspect. The sound was really important as well. In fact, the filmmaker really talked about how they recreated sounds that were really difficult to capture in situ, and how they sort of add layers of sound. But the film really has a good balance in terms of the aesthetics, as I said, and the film and the vision of the filmmaker. Tatiana spent 4 years visiting this community to get to know the people, to really build trust with them, and this is something that is obviously transpires in the film. There's no interviews, there's no voice off, there's no narration. We really are there with the people, sharing what they are doing, and it was just mesmerizing. And I think it's one of these films that when you see, you realize that how difficult actually is to get to this point. But yeah, this is kind of a bit of an overview of film. What do you think of the Echo?
Yeah, and pun intended, but I will echo a lot of what you say here, except I will like to emphasize that one of the reasons why I love going to film festivals like IDFA, and we're fortunate to do that, and Berlinale, is sometimes the way in which a film is screened and showcased. And we're not always fortunate to get films like this in every city or every place in the world. And I'm not agnostic on how things are screened. And this was particularly at one of the best, one of the most exciting museums and cinemas in the world at the Eye, in one of the larger sort of screens. So it was the first time I'd gotten to go to that particular screen. And from that moment, as you discussed at the very beginning of the film, you could tell you're in for a very cinematic experience in that setting, very similar to the experience I had with Aquarella when I saw it in IDFA as well. Really fits in that kind of experience. So starting off, it's a film that if you can see it in a cinema, a large cinema, please do. And I think the thing that you mentioned interviews, of course. There's a great deal of dialogue that's happening, that feels sort of interviewee, but it isn't this traditional kind of film. It's very poetic. And there were times where I was thinking, well, what is going on here? And trying to get into it and understand it. And then at the end of the film, I have to say, like, I was quite emotional, and I just felt very moved. And I get quite emotional in film, so I cry a lot. You've been next to me on a few times where I have tears running down my eyes, and this was one of the cases where I just felt the power of this film is in so much of the poetic nature of the people in the film, and the way they were filmed, who they are, and I think the children have such, they're not only just gorgeous and beautiful, but they're so, the way that Tatiana was filming their eyes and their emotions, and every shot was very planned. And so we talk a lot of sometimes about hybrid documentaries. This film was something that feels a lot more like a fiction film than other documentaries that we saw or that we tend to see. Every shot felt like a a stunning shot that, you know, you would maybe find in a Hollywood studio film, but not really. Obviously, it's in the Echo town in Mexico, but the attention to that kind of cinematic shots were clearly there. And I just sort of sat as a filmmaker, just kept thinking, wow, how did she do that? So, I mean, I think, you know, because there was obviously multiple shots of sort of in different scenes, I was thinking that when the grandma was kind of being bathed, multiple different kinds of shots and how beautiful it was. But it was a film like I've never seen before, to be honest. So I think that was the one thing that I really came out of it. Yeah, so I loved that. I also would think the opportunity to see the filmmaker speak about that made me also realize how poignant and why I got so emotional. I mean, I think one of the things that Tatiana spoke about was when you're in that kind of rural lifestyle, the family, you know, this portrait of a family, and how much children have to grow up so quickly. And I think that's something, you know, while they're so innocent and like I said, there's quite beautiful, and, you know, and you're sort of spending time with young people, you can also see how much hard work it is to be working in the land, or to be, you know, going through these kinds of daily routines and lifestyle, and how beautiful that experiences is, but how that matures you at such a young age. So that was something I think that was quite poignant about the film as well.
Absolutely, and also like what feels extraordinary about the film is the way she works with children, and as she said in the talk as well, she's very interested in depicting childhood and the experience of childhood, because as she expressed, it's something that really lasts like a very short span of time, and when you live in a rural community, it's even shorter because they need to look after each other, look after the land. And to me, that was astonishing about the film, the way she directed the film, the way she captures their innocence, their curiosity about the world, the care they put onto the animals and their grandmother. It's, as you said, it's beautiful, it's moving, and it's really touching that we can experience that in such a genuine and authentic way. And I dare to say authentic, even though sometimes I'm very reluctant to use this word when talking about a documentary, but it really feels like she has invested herself with this community and has actually managed to build this trust, these bonds with the people. And I just wanted to mention as well that her previous film is called Prayers for the Stolen, which is also based on the novel with the same name by Jennifer Clement. And it also revolves around 3 girls that are growing up in a rural community in Mexico. But in a way, their innocence is disrupted by this threat of the drug cartels and the kidnapping of young girls in this area, but also obviously echoing, again, using this word, what's actually happening on a larger scale in Mexico. So it's very interesting to see how she's come from Prayers for the Stolen to this one. And kind of there's a common thread in the way that she's interested about childhood, specifically female childhood, I dare to say, in the context of rural Mexico. And you can see that she has a feminist approach in this film. There's a talk about the way they care about everything, the way that care work is depicted in the film is heavily, heavily carried out by women. We don't see the men. The men are far away working, presumably in the big city in Mexico, but presumably even in the United States. I mean, that's never said, but that's something that you can think of. And so this care work relies on the women, and we see these gender divides as well between the children. So it's very interesting how she's actually talking about this, but from a very respectful way as well, and with a lot of sensitivity and care. So she's a really careful filmmaker. And I absolutely love that about the film, and how many layers the film has, and how much care she's putting into the subjects and into the story and what she wants to say with this film.
Yeah, and I think this only maybe is a reference to a few people who would have seen our project. It sort of reminds me when you and I worked on this I Can Where I'm Gone project last year, which was focusing on archive of people working the land, but also this idea of a cycle of life. And I think, while the children were obviously a huge focus, I think one of the other characters was the grandmother in the film, who was really, a really carefully depicted, but also a really special character in the film, and with almost a sense of guilt a bit, so there was a cycle of life kind of conversation happening, and a really, really just beautiful and special sort of relationship between the younger daughter caring for the grandmother and whatnot. So I really loved every element of it, and I can't wait to see it again. And I think probably why we started with this one is one of our favorites, I would assume, from what we saw. And happy. The other thing about IDFA is that, they had quite, as you said, it's because it's part of the signed strand, but there was some best effects strand. I mean, there was just so many films that were being shown. And so if you're a lover of documentary and you can get to see this, it's amazing how many films over the course of those few days were being, and it's really a full catalog of some of the best films. And this one was one of my favorites of the year for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm also looking forward to watching it again.
Okay, so the next film we're going to talk about, I will introduce myself, and I saw it in the same cinema. I finally went to Cinema 1, and I might never leave again. I want to see all films there, except I really love the Tuchinski as well, and we'll talk about that later. But so Already Made was a Dutch film directed by Barbara Visser, and I was curious about it. The first film I saw, and might talk a little bit more about that later, was about my favorite Fluxus artist, Nam June Paik. And I have I have an absolute love and fascination of films about Fluxus and films about Dada. So I was quick to go see this film because it's Already Made, which is focusing very much on one of the most famous ready-made pieces of art called The Fountain, which learned quickly, even though I've lived here for quite a few years, that British people call urinals, and I call them urinals. But so this famous piece of art is a urinal that was in a 1917 art exhibit and has been attributed to Marcel Duchamp, and it was signed as Armut, and it's over time been considered one of the most important modern art, the beginning of conceptual art and everything like that. And this film brings into question, I suppose, or brings up the controversy that's, I think, been happening, I guess, online. It feels like a little bit of a conspiracy sort of thing in the art world, where that potentially Marcel Duchamp is not the original creator of this. He was a Dada artist, so obviously with Dada it was very much like art is not what is art and all this sort of stuff. And the Dada movement very much was about working together and playing on the idea of art. So the call to question of what art is art and whether or not he was the actual artist is all sort of like muddled up in the whole concept of art and that they were playing with. But the main point of this film is to discuss potentially that the person who came up with this was a woman artist, a German avant-garde artist who was also living in New York at the time, Baroness Elsa von Freytag Loringhoven. And the filmmaker really goes into great detail to kind of bring up these, again, conspiracies or concepts or things, first by taking Marcel Duchamp and looking at his language and whether or not he was a liar, and using sort of found footage of people online who you would see on YouTube, catching that up and making sure, whether or not someone's telling the truth. And then going through great detail to, discuss it with other people who would say yes or no. And the way that it was done was not your typical art film. It was done in a very sort of tongue-in-cheek way, kind of fun, almost like it was its own, what is it? Sorry, you're going to have to step in. Laptop film? What do you call it?
Desktop documentary.
Yes, desktop documentary. So there's this element of this feature film. It feels a little bit like a desktop documentary. And then there's this part that she kind of recreates Baroness Elsa, as a movement through, an actor. And so there's a whole long process in which we kind of explore this story and mostly with the idea that Elsa von Freytag has been largely forgotten from the archive of the Dada movement as well, and ignored, and that becomes a main focus of the film. So all in all, I was interested in this story. It's not something I had actually heard about. I was interested in Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Lorenhoven. I wouldn't say that would be the way I would have made that film. I think it went on a little bit too long and here and there, but I had fun with it. So Amaya, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree with the last thing that you said. I mean, I was engaged when I was watching the film. It's definitely very interesting subject matter, and I didn't have any idea about this woman. I mean, it does surprise me because I think it's the history of art, right? Like the amount of things that actually could probably be credited to women, and the fact is that there's no evidence, or there's it's been concealed. So it doesn't surprise me that this could actually have been the artwork of a woman. And as the director says, or someone in the film says at some point, if it had been done by a woman, it would have never reached that status in art history as one of the most important artworks or masterpieces in the history of art. So obviously that's interesting. It's not new. We've seen it before. We know about this. But having said that, it is interesting that she focuses on bringing this woman back to life in a way, using different techniques. And as you said, I was not that keen on some of the stuff she was using. I thought, on the one hand, sometimes it was a bit of a show off of all the kind of things that they could do in terms of recreating sort of video gaming style. But sometimes I was like, it's kind of diverting our attention as well. But I guess it's also part of this whole construct as well, and what kind of becomes an art object as well. So it could be sort of added into the discussion. I thought it could have been slightly shorter for what was actually going to talk about the film. But I actually, one of the things that I really enjoyed, and probably you did as well, loving archive film, is how they sent this film to restoration and then it comes back, and it's completely amazing the work they done with this little piece of film where they actually are able to identify this person by the little information they have about her life. So I thought that was very interesting. And it's definitely a fun film to watch. I think they are really playful and being very comic about the whole thing. The fact, that one of the masterpieces of art history is a urinal, as you said, is funny in itself. So I think they really play well with this absurdity of what constitutes a masterpiece. But yeah, it was definitely not my favorite in terms of form, and yeah, I thought it could have been slightly shorter, but it's definitely worth watching.
Again, I've seen quite a lot of these mystery films, of whether the caper art film. I mean, it's one of my favorite genres, to be honest. Like I love art films. So it wasn't what I was expecting, and so I have to admit that that's not, that's first my expectations were blown a bit, and then yet I was still interested in the subject matter. I give the filmmaker props for doing such a, interesting take. I think the fact they were all sitting in like this sort of virtual room talking, like in a Starbucks, and there was like loud noises in there and then whatever. That was off-putting in aspects, but also funny, and like it was weird, and like at the same time, like maybe again that's a comment of like what Dada would be today. Who knows? You know what I mean? Like I don't know, but it was fascinating, it was just not something you would expect. Like, it's not the Lost Leonardo or whatever film that, like, there were 3 films from last year. So
no, absolutely. I mean, that bit about the Starbucks, I was also like, really, I didn't like it at all, aesthetically speaking. But I also found it very funny because they're in a virtual space that is a Starbucks, and they are having all very philosophical and pretentious reflections of what this is and who is the actual author of this masterpiece. So it's hilarious in that way, and I didn't expect it. So yeah, it's true that she really achieves this thing of challenging our expectations about what an art documentary is as well, which is true because there's a format associated to art documentaries, and she's completely challenging the whole assumptions around this continuously. So in retrospect, now that we talk about it, I can feel that it's much worthwhile than when I was watching it, and maybe I wasn't feeling that fascinated by it.
All right, so already made. That was already made, and Amaya, the third film we saw together, and I too. I feel like the films that we're talking about are all in the I cinema. Was A Cemetery of Cinema, and tell me about that film.
Yes, so The Cemetery of Cinema is directed by Tierno Suleiman Diallo. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this name correctly, but that's my attempt. And it's a film it's a co-production between France, Senegal, Guinea, and Saudi Arabia. This was part of the Best of Fest strand. And similar to The Echo, this film was nominated for Best Documentary and Panorama Audience Award at the Berlin International Film Festival this year. So again, it has already our attention because it had been in a very important section of the Berlinale. So this documentary explores film archive in a very specific context, which is the story of Guinea. And the film follows the director. Well, he sets out with his camera in search of this 1953 film called Muramani, directed by Mamadou Touré, which is believed to be the first film ever made in Guinea. So he's tracking down the film, and on this journey he speaks to different people in the country, but also in France, who know about the film but haven't seen it. So it's a very, I love the film. It was definitely one of the favorites, my favorites that I watched at IDFA. I love how he's approaching this theme, which is film archives, and the fact that film archives are very important to any country's history and identity, but particularly to Guinea, and the fact that they had the independence war that unfortunately caused the destruction of a lot of these archives. But also the fact of who owns the archives in today's world, which is, as we know, mostly former colonies. And as much as we love many countries care with archives, the fact is that they still exert a lot of control and power over the archive films of other countries. So this is an example of how the filmmaker, in a very playful way, he's not pretentious at all. He goes on this journey, on this quest, and we see that everyone is very well aware of the importance of this film and how important it would be to have a properly cared for archive in the country. But in the end, he has to go to France, where they have this incredible archive, but they don't actually have the film. And one of the things that I find really interesting as well is that when he's speaking to different people, one of them says that actually there's another film considered the first film of Guinea, which happens to do with the revolution rather than Muramani, who is just about a shepherd, I believe, and it's just very like everyday life in Guinea. So again, who decides what's the first film in a national cinema? I thought that was brilliantly put across in the film, and just a very good reflection on canon, on film history canon, and the power of film archives. So definitely worth watching. I hope this film has to see because it's very performative, it's very playful, it really makes you think throughout, and it's just very, very entertaining to watch as well, which it doesn't happen usually with this type of subject matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think, Amanda, of this film?
Yeah, I agree. I'd say the same thing. So we pretty much agree all around. But I think one of the things that really hit me, just similarly to Already Made that we talked previously about, is obviously the how. Yeah, I wish that it had been buttoned up and we had found the film in France, and because I do think there was this element of using the archive in this story and being playful with it, and Already Made it was the same thing, but this was maybe more of a traditional story. But also, sharing how important these spaces are, archives, cinema spaces, to the importance of an archive and films to the history of a country, and the stories that have been told about them over the years, and yet what we actually have, and the importance of preserving those films. I think that it asks a lot of great questions, and it doesn't have to do it always so seriously. And so I think that this is a really great film to express that. And I think the other film that I can briefly mention that I saw that was having a similar conversation around cinematic spaces was a film I saw after that called Pictures of Ghosts by Clebe Mendoza Filho, around Brazil and these cinema spaces. And both these films coming together for me, it really describe how attached, cinema and cinematic spaces are to a country's history and to a city's place or whatnot. So I think I really got a lot out of this film, and will take a lot from it, and hopefully we'll be able to see it again.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned a couple of films that I really liked as well, which I just said, Pictures of Ghosts, and I also saw a film on Nam June Paik, The Moon is the Oldest TV, directed by Amanda Kim. So I loved those two films. Maya, just quickly before we finish up this IDFA segment, any other films that you saw during your IDFA experience that you wanted to do a quick shout out about?
Yes, so one of the films that I watched and I loved is called As the Tide Comes In, and is a Danish film made by a Spanish filmmaker, and it was playing at the international competition. And this is a film that focuses on the impacts of climate change on a small, tiny island off the coast of Denmark, where there's only 27 people living. And it focuses on Gregers, who's the last farmer, and it's a really interesting portrayal of this island community. It's beautifully shot. It's again, the filmmaker captures really well the relationships, how close-knit the community is, but also how, in a way, they are not scared of this imminent storm coming to the island that might actually completely drown the island. So it's an interesting take on, the effects of climate change and flooding and storms in specifically in this area, in this region. But also, island community life, and Gregers is also trying to get on this program of meeting, farmer meets wife, or once, I don't know what's the title, but I think it's kind of an international program. So that's also very interesting to see. But he's a very interesting character, Gregers, in itself. He doesn't play the usual he has a lot of layers in it. He's rough, but also you can see how how tender, how intimate he is with the animals, with his son. So it's a beautiful film, and actually we managed to catch the director before we left on the last day. So we will also have interview with the director.
Great. And yes, and after we come back, we'll hear from Amaya speaking to the director of As the Tide Comes In.
Hello, we are here with Juan Palacios, who's a director of the As the Tide Comes In, which is your third feature-length film, and is having its world premiere as part of the international competition at IDFA. So first of all, how are you feeling about all of this?
I mean, it's an honor to have the film in such a great festival and in such a in the main competition. So yeah, I mean, I think we couldn't dream of a better start for the film. I think it's the kind of film that I think it's the right place for this particular film, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as I said, the world premiere is tomorrow. And then do you have plans with the film to go to other festivals? Is it still too early for that?
No yet, honestly, because we finished the film in summertime and we haven't submitted to that many festivals, I think.
Okay.
It was like, and then the way it got selected is because like the director of IDFA, Orva, he came to the Danish Film Institute to watch some films, and that's where he found it. So I think this is going to be the start, and after this we'll start like trying to move it around.
Okay. Yeah. So now let's move on to the film, and I wanted to, if you could tell us with your own words, what's this film about, and what was the origin of the story? What sort of drew you to this particular community, and why did you wanted to tell this story?
What the film is about, I think there are a lot of layers in the film, but the film is about this little island. Like, it's very tiny. It's this little Danish island in the Wadden Sea, in the west coast of Denmark. And it's only 27 people living there. And it's a very flat land, right? So, well, the water of the sea is getting warmer because of climate change. Also, like, the storms are becoming more violent. So, yeah, and also, like, the dikes that are, like, protecting the island are pretty much obsolete, because there's almost no one living there anymore. So like the government doesn't really, invest that much money. So the film, in a way, it's about like speculating about this possible storm that could come and wipe them out.
Yeah.
And I guess it's a little bit a film about waiting. Like, we have these characters that, in a way, because they've been living there for such a long time, also pretty much in relation with the storms and with the sea, they kind of like, sometimes there is this feeling that they are more carefree. Like they kind of like, they take it as if it was something normal.
Yeah.
I mean, however, like, like scientists say that, like the storm that could come, it could be like more destructive than the ones before because of the new situation with the sea. Yeah.
And that's interesting that you said that, because definitely there's something in the film very interesting, which is this sort of tension between the islanders and the outside world, meaning the people in the capital, in Copenhagen, who are warning them about climate change, whereas for them it's like, it's kind of part of their day-to-day, and they see it as like a little bit of wind, or there's always been change, That's what Greger said at some point. And I was just wanting to ask you as well, because you have a background in environmental sciences, and then obviously I guess this was also your interest of like addressing this issue in this particular community. But how do you approach this topic to the islanders when it feels like, not that they are closed off or that they are denying climate change, but maybe they don't speak about it in the sort of alarming ways that maybe people in another context do? So what was your approach with them?
Right. I mean, I'm into contradictions. Like wherever there is a contradiction, I think for me there is something that attracts me.
Yeah.
I think also we live in a time in which like climate change or the impending ecological catastrophe, it's already the context of the time when we live in. So you basically don't have to kind of like even mention it. That's already in the atmosphere. And I think this is like quite an atmospheric film. And I'm like into this kind of like this kind of sensation that almost everyone knows that something is coming, right? But we kind of like look a little bit the other way sometimes. And I think the Islanders on Manu are a little bit like that. They know, like they know they're at risk. Like even like Gregas acknowledges that, you know, and he knows that the dikes are old. But at the same time, I think maybe because sometimes they might feel a little bit powerless because there's not much they can do about it.
Yeah.
So maybe they prefer like looking the other way.
So was that your connection to this community specifically? How did you find out about them, and why did you wanted to talk about them?
So the project started like Andreas Dalsgaard, he's the main producer at Elk, at the production company that produced the film. He went on a visit to this island on his own, like a particular on a summer vacation.
Okay.
And he really liked the peculiarities of the reality of the island, and he thought that there might be a film here. And then he proposed me to direct this film.
Okay.
So that's how it began. Like it wasn't something like unlike my previous films. This wasn't a film that came from me. It was like proposed to me. But I mean, it was like the main idea was like to make a film about this island. Then I had to figure out all the approach, and there was also a lot of writing involved actually.
But that's quite interesting as well, because like one of the, for me, amazing things about this film is the intimacy that you build with the characters, and knowing that you are not from that community, and that, you know, it was not your sort of first impulse to do this story, is even much more striking that you actually managed to this great deal of intimacy with the islanders, and particularly with Gregers, who's the main character and is the last farmer in the island.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to build this trust with them? How was for you in terms of how easy and challenging was for you to position yourself as a sort of outsider in this close-knit community? And how did you navigate those challenges as well, of like showing a story of someone else from an outside, like, you know, from an outsider perspective? But as I said, you manage that intimacy. So if you can tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, honestly, like it was so much work. I think like big part of the work, like the main part of the work was actually creating the right conditions for us to film. It was like, because we didn't film that much. There is not that much material. It was so much about like gaining their trust, like bonding with them, like getting to know their reality and their vital stories, like very well. So there was a lot of research involved. So Sophia, who is the co-director, and she's also like a visual anthropologist. So she, at some point, she spent like a couple of weeks on her own, like on the island, getting to know like the 27 islanders, like spending time with them, interviewing them, and basically getting to know their life stories. And all that served as the foundation for the writing. Then with all those stories, we would like discuss the ones that were like maybe more relevant to kind of reveal the layers of the thematic layers of the film. Like some stories would like help us to, I don't know, to kind of like surface something about the road that it's connecting the island with the mainland that gets flooded twice a day. So there were like in their personal narratives, there were like certain elements that would help us somehow like reveal different stuff
Yeah, like
about the
moon thing. I really like
yeah
that
for
bit
instance
about
exactly yeah
like how the new moon affects you, but obviously we know that moon affects tides as well. So I thought that was quite a nice aspect of the film. And obviously you also managed to get a lot of humor out of their everyday lives, which I thought that was also really good for like a topic that sometimes can feel a bit, gloom and doom, climate change. And I appreciate that as a spectator, that is more, it's lighthearted, but it's still very, very much deep, because we're seeing how it's affecting human lives.
Right.
And so you touch a bit on the process and the fact that you did a bit of writing, and your previous work, or your work, is also in experimental video, in visual diary, film essays. So you are quite a comprehensive artist, whereas this is more like an observational document. You said that you've done some writing. So can you tell us a bit about that? Like, how was the process of making this document? You said there was some research, and then did you use that research to write a story? How did you choose Gregors? Was that obvious from the beginning that you wanted to focus the story from the farmer's perspective?
Well,
There's a lot of questions.
yeah, no, yeah, no, that's okay. I think regarding Gregas, again, like there's something about the contradiction that he really embodies that I found like very interesting. Yeah, well, well, on one hand, like so first of all, he's one of the most active characters on the island, so it kind of made sense to follow his life.
Yeah.
Also, he's the youngest on the island, even though he's 45 or something. But if there is any future for the island, he might be the future. So that we found that interesting. Also, him being the last farmer. But there was also something about his attitude that I found like very interesting. He's like very self-sufficient. So he's an island in itself, right? Like there's some and then there is also like this. He kind of has this kind of like love-hate relationship with the place, because on one hand, like, I mean, his whole identity is based on the island, on being an islander, but at the same time, as it is shown in the film, also when he was younger, he wanted to leave, and in the end, like being a farmer is something that he inherited from his parents, and maybe it's not something that he really wanted. So in a way, like it's part of his identity, the island, but at the same time, it's like a little bit of a burden. So there is this contradiction that I found interesting. And also, I think the fact that he's a hunter, for me, there is something about hunters that it's incredible, because Gregas is such a knowledgeable person. He knows so much about the island and about all the animals that live there. He actually loves all those animals. Like when he talks about them, you can tell the kind of like tenderness. He really knows those birds. But then he also hunts for them. And for me, that's like a very strange contradiction that I find I found appealing. So that was in regards to Gregas. And then the other question was about the writing process, right?
Yeah, and the process of making this film, and the particular angles that you chose. As you said, there's many layers, and how much writing was there involved?
Yeah, I think the writing was a lot in regards, like, so we didn't want to have interviews in the film. So most of the time, like whenever we want to have some sort of oral story, it's an encounter between two characters, right? And they start talking. So actually creating those encounters, that was really the big writing planning process, because that's not something that is just happening there, right? You have to create the situation and the condition, both for the encounter to happen, but also to film it in the way we wanted to film it, like to create like some sort of like interesting cinematic texture. So I think there was a lot of writing and planning in regards to that, but it was a lot about planning for because we could plan the situation, but then whatever that happened there, that was very spontaneous. Like we kind of could create like the in and out of the scene, so to speak. But whatever that would happen there, it was like very genuine. So yeah, it was so much writing for those spontaneous encounters to happen, and that was so much work. That was really like big part of the work. more than filming in itself.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you about the challenge because I know that you have this sort of more artsy background in experimental video, and how was for you like filming these big storms, and like in terms of was it like challenging for you actually to be out there in the storm filming these and the floods and maybe your equipment getting damaged? Like how was that as well?
It was a challenge, but I also love the challenge.
Yeah.
I must say. I know, like when I'm looking for when I'm in this aesthetic search, like there's some fuel that keeps me going. So yeah, I mean, like
your equipment is still in one piece.
I think it was insurance. So
That's good.
yeah, still working. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you answered that question.
Yeah, no, it's just I thought, I mean, the film is very beautifully shot, and but obviously because we see the storm and it actually feels very threatening. So in that way, it's also very immersive because you are out there with the character and the storm is coming, and
Right.
I'm thinking about you as well as a filmmaker or your crew, and the challenges posed by this changing light as well. But yeah, I mean, you are an experienced filmmaker, so. My last question is just because, as you said before, we live in climate change. This is our current context. What can we learn from the people in this island, from their approach to how they go on with their day-to-day, how they are handling these rising seas? What can we learn from them? Because it seems like, I really like that from the film that, they are like, oh, what are the people from Copenhagen going to tell us? So what can we learn from them?
That's sad.
In your view?
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly something about like, I mean, they kind of like have this idea of like that everything is changing all the time. Like they have it like very much integrated. They live in a landscape that has been changing all the time. It's like these islands actually, like it's something that get like in geological terms, they get created and they disappear quite quick in geological terms. And it's also like an island that has been changing a lot. They overcame like different floodings.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe there is something about like dealing with the forces. Yeah, the resilience. Yeah. I think there is,
and maybe not fearing it, but like maybe learning to live with it. I don't know. That's something I kind of came
just no
with that feeling from the film.
Totally. Certainly, I'm not like in the film. I don't think I'm trying to encode a message. But it's like I think this is like something that people are going to read when they watch the film. Wanted to say something else regarding this.
Which is also interesting because, like there's this whole genre of environmental documentaries, and this is, as you said, is not lecturing. You're not giving any didactic message, or you're not trying to put it across any agenda, but it's more like how climate change is affecting this specific community. And I think it's a very interesting film for us as well. We are based in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and flooding is also something that really affects Scotland. So definitely, I think it's a film that will resonate a lot in other parts of the earth, specifically in the UK. So yeah, it's really. I just want to say, just to finish, that thank you for your film. Congratulations. I think it's really good portrayal of this community and very immersive. And I wish you all the best with the film.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having it. Yeah.
So we're back, and I'm here with Yi Wang, who is the director of Queer East Film Festival, multi-arts festival. I've known you for a few years. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
So you have a very exciting lineup coming to Edinburgh. This is not your first time in Edinburgh. You've been here many times before, a couple times before. Tell me a little bit about what's coming to Summerhall and City Chambers at the end of this month.
Yeah, so this year we will be working with Summerhall for the very first in their cinema space. So there will be 4 screenings at Summerhall from 29th of November to 2nd of December. And we will be showing 3 feature films from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China, and also a short film collection that titled All About My Mother, which consists of 6 short films from different East and Southeast Asian countries that all deal with the complicated relationship between queer kids and their mother. And very specially, actually, we will also have a VR showcase at the Summerhall that running through the entire 4 days. And that's a free working event with a VR production from Taiwan called In the Mist, which was a VR production we did last year. And then the screenings were also out in London last year, so we were just thinking, oh, it would be great to bring it back. So that will happen across the 4 days in Summerhall as well. And very specially, actually, we will be running a panel discussion with you, Amanda, and also with Indigo from Scottish Scottish Queer International Film Festival, and also Marvin from Edinburgh Community Cinema Project. And the conversation will be surrounding by the topics about community, accessibility, and also how we use cinema as a tool to bring the community and creative society together.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm very excited for that event as well. And the films. You know, I know you personally, but I really loved watching the journey of your festival. And if you could just take us back a little bit on, you're based in London, correct? But why you started the festival and how it's sort of evolved over time and now coming, you know, to different locations and touring. I mean, it's a really exciting story.
Yeah. So every time I talk about the journey of me starting Queer East, it was literally came from a very selfish reason, is that I am a huge fan of East and Southeast Asian queer cinema, and during my time in London over the past 7 years, I found that I didn't really had opportunities and ways to watch all these East and Southeast Asian queer cinema. And so I just had this idea, a very naive idea, that I had no relationship with film industry before. But like back in 2019, I had this idea of why not putting together actually a film series about East and Southeast Asian queer cinema. And I was lucky enough to get some funding from Mayor of London and also from BFI to support the series. And it just from like a very small project then sort of became a big festival. And the first year is supposed to happen in 2020, which is definitely the best year to starting a new festival. I don't know if you heard there's something called pandemic.
Something happened, yeah.
But that was us. Yeah, and so we moved things to online, but like the festival's still there, and we managed to get really good sort of online presence in our first year. And a lot of people were really interested in the idea of East and Southeast Asian queer cinema, because I'm sure that back then there were so many people that they didn't really had a chance before to see these films.
Yeah.
So the festival then sort of becoming bigger and bigger. We got really great partnership with from like BFI South Bank, Barbican Center to a lot of brilliant independent and community cinemas. And yeah, so that's kind of like the festival is currently based in London. So we run a 2 week festival across 10 venues in London. And then sort of like 2021, so second year of the festival of I don't want this film just being seen by London audience, because like all the events, cultural events are happening in London. And I think like all these films, they are very rare to have this chance to be shown to the public in the to the audience in the UK. So I just had this idea, and of course there were some funding support for us to do this. So we start taking our films to different locations in the UK and start from like 7 cities. Now we are sort of working with around 10 to 15 cities across the country and showcase a collection of festival highlights every year.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it's an amazing story. And I think the 2 points of it, which really come out to me, is you starting not from a film background, but seeing the power of cinema to bring the queer community together and what you're trying to do by bringing it across different locations and different areas, like not just sort of cities that you would expect to sort of see this, by building a community around East queer cinema. What have you learned, or what have you heard from audiences about what you're doing? Have you heard great feedback or over the years?
Yeah, of course I will only say great things. but like, no, I think it is very encouraging in terms of audience feedback. Because of course, like we usually do surveys in our screenings, and that's also a very great tool for us to understand our audience. The majority of audience I find is they really appreciate the space we create, and I think that's sort of the core ideology of queer is we trying to build up this space that didn't exist in the UK before, that it is a space for East and Southeast Asian communities and queer communities to come together to see the on-screen representation that they didn't get a chance to see before. Also for general public, they have this space to have a chance to understand East and Southeast Asian queer cultures that are often excluded from the mainstream queer narratives in this country. Because of course we all know sort of the queer narrative here are very white gay man centric. That's always a criticism about like a queer narrative in this country. And then I feel that I very appreciate that our audience know what we are trying to do, and then they sort of resonate with all the jobs we are doing here of like creating this space. And I think the other thing is we also hear a lot of positive feedback from filmmakers, because a lot of these filmmakers either they are from East and South, they are directly from East and Southeast Asian backgrounds or not. These kind of queer Asian narratives are not usually being selected by a lot of film festivals across the world. And they are really happy there's a platform that centers on this storytelling and have these opportunities to bring their stories and to bring their share their filmmakings with a wider audience in the UK. And I think the third perspective will be audience outside London, because when I go to tour, I usually go to tour with I usually go to different cities with our touring programs. And so I had a chance to, and these films that showing their local cinema, because not just like, normal commercial blockbusters or, like some like sort of like more famous titles, but instead they get a chance to see these like very rarely seen queer cinema and East and Southeast Asian cinemas that sort of tells different kinds of stories. And then I think that's very exciting for us as well, that I always feel like we are contribute something, although we are very small scale festival, but I feel like we always sort of contribute a positive impact in the industry of bring a more diverse perspectives to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you just said, I think the life of a film sometimes ends at a festival, that you might in a part of the world that then you don't ever see outside of that. And it's so important that you bring, we're trying to do this a little bit with our doc program as well, is try to bring films, to Edinburgh audiences that would never get seen here otherwise. And it's so important to share these stories and these films, and it means so much to both the audiences and the filmmakers. And so it's great. Can you talk a little bit about the program that you're sharing with Edinburgh this year? You have some really incredible films from the past and then you have UK premieres. Tell us a little bit about what we should expect.
Yeah, so I think one of the highlights is I think in Edinburgh we show all the highlights of the festival, and I think I will start from like very 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 long very old retrospective. So that's only in Edinburgh that showing a Hong Kong musical, The Love Eaten, 梁山伯与祝英台, which is a super famous Chinese folk stories about sort of features a strong gender play, I would say. So it's a rich girl, women are allowed to study, so she has to pretend as a boy to go to the old boys school, and then she made this guy, they fall in love. But behind that is actually because it's a Chinese, traditional Chinese opera. So all the characters are, the main characters are actually all played by female actors. So the male character was actually portrayed by a female actress. And so it's sort of like this multi-layer gender play, which I find is super queer. And I really like this film. So I just think like the perfect fit for the idea of queerist. And the film was made in 1963.
So 60th anniversary, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this year is marks the 60 years anniversary. So I'm very, really excited to have this film to go to Edinburgh with us. And then another retrospective is Cai Minliang's Rebels of Neon God, which is his first debut feature film made in 1992. And from my understanding, before us showing this film in April in London, this film hasn't been shown publicly in the UK for over 16 years. So I think this is another great chance to see a big, sort of a big title on a big screen again. And we had Bad Women of China, which was premiered with us in the UK this year. This is a documentary that told the story about 3 generations of Chinese women in China, made by He Xiaopei, who is a very leading figure in queer activism in China and also a filmmaker. And I think this film just the film did very well with us in the UK. We saw out many of these screenings, and I think audience really, really enjoying to had a chance to hear these on her stories about Chinese women that from like spending around over 100 years. And yeah, and so like these 3 feature films, I all really enjoying them, and I think it is great that we have a chance to share them with Edinburgh audiences. And of course, we also have a show film programs that has these years queer plums award-winning films, Will You Look at Me, which by a very young emerging Chinese director Huang Shuli, and this is sort of a very heartfelt documentary about the filmmaker and his mother's conversation. So then, of course, the film screened along with another 5 films, fictional short films that also deal with the same topic about queer kids and their mothers. So yeah, so really exciting about these full screenings.
And your festival is cross-disciplinary, so it's film primarily, right? But it's also got, like you said, this VR installation and there was an immersion installation as well, and various things. What is is that kind of come up recently, and is that sort of your vision for the future, or to have more different aspects to the festival? What are you thinking about in terms of 2024?
Yeah, so I think so that has always been my idea of, because I think Queer East is a festival that focuses on queer East and Southeast Asian cultures. And I feel that we shouldn't just limit it by using film as our own medium. And so from this year, we started to program performing arts. This year in London, we had 2 dance productions that also talks about East and Southeast Asian queer cultures. And of course, we've been doing VR since 2022. And so this is kind of my idea of, like, I hope we can include different art forms into the festival. And I also feel like filmmakers, artists these days are all very cross-disciplinary.
Yeah.
They do their work through different forms. And so the boundary seems all getting very blurred now. Like, film artists can also be filmmakers. In the past, artists moving image was usually only shown in museum or galleries.
Yeah.
And now you can see more and more artists. They start to embrace doing screenings in cinemas, and you also start seeing like filmmakers. They are doing films not just present on the screen, but also like it can be interactive installations with audience. So I just feel like it's sort of a nature direction turn for the festival of just having different ways to express queer and East and Southeast Asia cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very encouraging, though, to see a festival that is, relatively new, like engaging and watching what the creative community is doing. It was very ambitious and very amazing, and all the work I've always seen that you've done has been incredible. So I highly recommend that everyone comes to both the panel on the 28th, for it's a bit of networking and a conversation around building a community, an accessible community, and that's at City Chambers, correct? So that's free at 6:30
events. Yeah.
And then all of the films are at Summerhall, as well as the installation. Anything else you want to add?
No, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys to join us at the very special community events this year. This is our first time to do this kind of events, and I'm exciting to get a chance to know a wider creative and film communities in Edinburgh.
Well, we are too, and definitely. Where can everyone find your information about getting tickets? So it's queereast.org.uk, your website, right? Is that the best place?
Yes. That's our website, but of course you can also follow us on X. Now it's called X, and also Instagram. It's all at Queer East, so just search Queer East, and then you will be able to find us.
Well, Yi, I look forward to you coming and to Edinburgh soon, and to seeing you in person, and also being part of your festival and seeing some of the amazing films you're bringing to Edinburgh audiences. So thanks again for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you.
All right, so that's our show this month. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for Juan and Yi for their interviews, and thank you to Amaya and Gary for joining. Are you looking forward to winter season of cinema going?
Absolutely. Yeah. Can't wait.
Definitely, yeah. Echo that.
Well, we'll see you next month, and thanks again.
Thank you, Amanda.